Welcome back one and all to another night of spooky real-life paranormal tales. I hope you've all had a great summer, but now it's time to get back to the darkness. Get yourself comfortable, we've got a long drive ahead of us tonight. Yet again I'm back to bring you more stories that have been sent to me by my listeners. As I always say, whatever you choose to believe is entirely up to you. But the people who submitted these stories all claim that their encounters really happened. So let's spend the midnight hour together, shall we? And get into our first story of the evening. First up, we've got a creepy little tale from Danny and his strange childhood encounters growing up in Lincolnshire. I've never really divulged or discussed this story with many people, barring a very small select few. Being 6 years old at the time, I've often felt that it would be met with ridicule, put down to an overactive juvenile imagination. I will always stand by my convictions though, that the following experiences were very real. As mentioned before, I was 6 years old at the time. I remember well as it was my younger sister's first day at primary school, and it was my second year. At the time we lived in a very modest terraced house in a small town in Lincolnshire, England. Being my second year, I was all dressed and ready to head off to school. My sister, however, was very emotional that morning, with it being her first day. Our mum was frantically trying to get her ready, whilst trying to arrest the understandable emotion and trepidation my sister was experiencing that morning. Being all ready and raring to go myself, I took situ on the bottom step of the hallway stairway. The hallway was a very small area, directly adjacent to the entrance of the living room where my mum was getting my sister dressed and ready. The top of the stairway had a very familiar creak, no matter where you stood. As I was sat at the bottom waiting, that very familiar creak was heard. Being there was only 3 of us in the house at the time, with my dad having long left for work, and the remainder of us downstairs, this was very out of place. I curiously turned to look up, strangely without any fear. Standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me, was a rather rotund, short, elderly lady with curly hair, with a rather stern look on her face, almost as if to imply that I was intruding in her home. Despite knowing that this was completely abnormal, I felt no fear at seeing this strange woman at the top of the stairs, nor did I alert my mum to her. I remember being completely affixed to her, our mutual gaze at each other lasting around 30 seconds or so, until finally she turned herself back around and headed back down the short space on the landing to the direction of the bedrooms. Out of sight again. Weirdly, I felt nothing of it, and just nonchalantly went about my wait for my mum and my sister. A couple of months passed from this initial sighting. If anything, by that point I had long forgotten the strange woman at the top of the stairs. However, there was one more sighting of her still to come, and this would be a more chilling interaction. At the time, I had a cabin bed with a small desk stool next to it. Like with the top of the stairs, this stool had a very audible creak to it when it was sat on or stood on. I was laying on my side at the time, facing the wall, having been in bed for around 10 minutes. My bedroom door was behind me, and I remember the landing light streaming into my room, indicating that the door had been opened. Believing it to be my dad making a final check to see if I was going to sleep, I turned to face the other direction to acknowledge him. There was nobody there upon first glance, but then I heard the desk stool creak. Peering over the top of my bed was the very same elderly lady I saw previously, with the same angry look on her face. We again locked eyes, neither of us saying a word. However, this time, she was about to get far more interactive. She proceeded to claw away at my stomach, digging her fingers deep into my flesh, very aggressively for what felt like a minute or so. This time, unlike the first encounter, I wanted to shout and scream for help, but for whatever reason I felt completely unable to emit any sound to alert my parents for help. Once she stopped, she just stood down off the stool, opened my bedroom door and exited. This time, never to be seen again. As with the first incident, I never spoke about these two encounters until years after. I can still visualize this lady to this very day, some 33 years on from the two encounters. In my own mind at the time, I gave her the rather juvenile name of Chunky, due to her aforementioned portly appearance. It turns out that other people, including my parents, had experienced strange incidents in that house, and some casual investigating into the history of the property, built in the 1960s, so not a steep history, revealed that an elderly lady did pass away in the master bedroom before my parents purchased the house. Whether it was the very same woman or not, I'm not sure, but I always will be sure of what I saw and experienced that morning and evening. For our next tale, we're heading to Sweden, but before we get into that, we've got a word from our sponsors, who have a suggestion for a book that might be the perfect read for this Halloween season. What if you had a guardian angel, one you've trusted since you were a child, who has saved your life several times, one you've had complete faith in, until they did something too horrible to be believed, even though you witnessed it? What if your guardian angel killed someone you loved? In Devils Kill Devils, the second novel by horror author Johnny Compton, a young woman named Sarita finds her faith destroyed when her guardian angel beats her husband to death on her wedding night. Devastated yet determined, Sarita has to find out why this has happened, and whether anyone else she cares about is in danger, because unholy forces are seeking her, and she will soon discover that her supernatural protector was only saving her from death because a darker fate awaited. Devils Kill Devils is available for pre-order now, and will be in bookstores everywhere on September 24th, 2024. Click the link in the description or visit devilskilldevils.com to reserve your copy with your favourite bookseller today and find out the answer to the final question: what if your guardian angel was a devil in disguise? Thank you to author Johnny Compton for supporting this episode of Night Drive Paranormal. And now, let's get into our second story. Here's what happened. I lived in the United States and was invited to stay with my friend who moved from England to Sweden to live with her boyfriend. She and I used to work for the same company and became very close friends, but had only met once before she moved. She told me she was a medium and frequently had experiences with the paranormal, but it never occurred to me that anything would happen directly to me when I went to visit. This is something that I maybe would have expected if we had physically worked in the same location and spent more time together in person, although that wouldn't have changed my decision to spend time with her. In 2018, she invited me to come for the midsummer holiday, which I had never heard of until she explained it to me. This was also before the movie came out, so it was fun to experience it without the preconceived notions. Plus, I got to tell people I had been to Sweden and was not sacrificed by the locals. There were only a couple of small peculiar occurrences throughout the week while I was there. She called me into a room to ask if I smelled anything, and I could smell cigarette smoke, but no one in the house smoked. She said she thought it might have been a family member that had passed away. Another time she smelled roses, which she said was her grandmother. Other than that, everything was quiet and I felt comfortable and at peace in their home. Until my second to last night there. I was staying in their spare room on the second floor on a large blow-up mattress, and throughout the week it had slowly started to deflate. It didn't bother me, so I didn't put more air into it. I was leaving soon anyway. But because the mattress wasn't as firm as it was when it was first blown up, any small movement was noticeable. But it was just me sleeping on it, so I didn't mind. I had my back to the door and was just starting to doze off when I felt the mattress pressed down as if someone was sitting on the edge of it. Then I had this sense that whoever or whatever was there was lying down as if to spoon me, and it felt like they were leaning up on their elbow, about to whisper in my ear. I could feel something close to the side of my face and hovering over my body as I lay on my side. I had a rush of thoughts all at once to try and rationalise what was happening. Could it be the cat jumped on the bed? No, he can't walk up the stairs on his own. He's old and has a bad leg. Plus, the door is closed and he doesn't have opposable thumbs. Could it be my friend's brother who was also visiting? Not Tim either. He left to go back to England 2 days ago. Well then, what the fuck is in my bed? I sat up, turned the light on to see no one there, and the door still closed. I slept with the light on for the rest of my visit. I told my friend the next day and she believed me, although her boyfriend is skeptical and wasn't as receptive. She offered to leave their bedroom door open that night if it made me feel better. It did and it didn't. But nothing else paranormal happened my last night there. My friend has a lot of different experiences in her home, and wherever she goes she's like a beacon for spirits. I think they sense that she's sensitive, and see it as an opportunity to try and communicate. So when this happened to me in her home, I wondered if it was just something random, or it could have been my husband that had passed away 4 years prior. A year after he died, I went to a medium, and she said he would be with me on all of my adventures. And this trip was definitely an adventure. Whatever climbed into bed with me didn't feel malicious or negative, but it wasn't comforting either. Nothing that extreme had happened to me since, and I'd like to keep it that way. Story number 3 takes us to Wales, and an experience with a poltergeist. I want to tell you an experience when I lived in Maesteg, Wales for 6 months, with my husband back in 2015, when my husband bought a dilapidated row house that needed major repairs. We lived near the end of Victoria Street, and it was my first time going overseas outside of America. The paranormal activity started slowly during the renovation, but towards the end it became unbearable. I was glad when we flew home. We would sweep the dusty floors one day, and the next day it was dirty again. The lemons I bought were mouldy within 24 hours, and the cooked smoked ham had specks of light that glowed in the dark. Plastic shopping bags that I crinkled into a ball would jump out from a cupboard and unfurl within reaching distance in front of my eyes. A single pearl on my necklace was snatched off and rolled under the floorboards, never to be seen again. During a walk in the local forest, a perfectly clean white feather appeared across the stream on a muddy bank. We heard high heels walking up the stairs, loud banging when no one was in the upper bedrooms, and furniture moving. Insulation, 1980s greeting card, a vehicle registration, or 100-year-old square rusty nails would pull out from the unfinished ceiling. A sharp granite boulder once appeared in the gaping ceiling over a chair that I would sit in. I looked up, panicked, and got confused as to why I didn't notice the dangerous rock before, and quickly removed it. The overhead swinging light over our kitchen table would flicker on and off above us. Sometimes I would see a white misty snake-like thing follow me around the place. The pillow next to my head would indent as if somebody were crawling on it. Fires broke out near the backyard of the property, and we had to call in the local firefighters to put them out. These bizarre occurrences happened more frequently the longer we stayed in Wales, especially ramping up after we visited castles, ancient ruins, pubs and historic churches. Layers of mysterious activity would build up until we fled back to the United States, and my husband later disowned the property. But this wasn't just connected to the house, I don't think. I have had a poltergeist attached to me for as long as I can remember. Of course, when I was growing up, I didn't know that strange occurrences around me could possibly be a poltergeist. My parents logically dismissed everything and told me that ghosts don't exist. End of discussion. Ignoring the spirit completely led to more activity. My parents were alcoholics who had loud parties and turned up the volume of the stereo or television so that the banging and knocking sounds were unheard. If someone did notice it, they acted amazed and puzzled, but they always dismissed it as the house settling. One of my earliest memories was a boy falling behind me in line. He yelled that I tripped him. But there may have been other incidents of people getting tripped around me. Even my husband at our wedding while walking down a few steps near the altar, or people falling off their bikes while riding near me. Fire alarms will go off in buildings for no reason, especially in schools. Fires will sometimes break out when I travel to unknown places, mostly along a roadside or a nearby park. Extreme activity picks up when I panic while under a lot of stress. That's when objects move on their own or pebbles get thrown around. I am now a middle-aged housewife married to a disabled military vet, who also dismisses the strange sounds and bizarre activity. Thanks for letting me finally reveal my lifelong secret. I hope that somebody believes me. I am always trying to find ways to understand and cope with my entity. Exorcism is not an option since poltergeists are extremely difficult to remove. I have accepted this uniquely rare part of me. Do you have a paranormal experience? Then please do get in touch with me at the tape library at protonmail.com. Please include whatever name you would like to be credited as, and as much detail as you can. I normally always try to read these accounts in the words of the witness who wrote in, so do bear that in mind. Case 4 now. This happened in Massachusetts, from September to November of 2021. 22 years old and just graduated from college, I got a job as a housekeeper for a nursing home. Not at all related to my degree, but such is the way of young Americans. With this first set of occurrences, it's just me and my cat, with no one else around. And around 10 or 10:30 at night for a few nights in a row, I'd hear light thudding sounds from down the hall. Every time I got to where they came from, I'd see nothing but my cat curled up on the couch. Since my cat is a creature of habit, I figured the sounds are him scratching at the arm of the couch, and I just happened to walk in at the end of his routine each time. So I scoop up the kitty and go back to bed. A couple of weeks later, I'm playing a game before bed, trying not to rage at the mercilessly low drop rates. I give up and decide it's time to sleep. I put the wired controller down on the ottoman in front of me and head to bed. Next day I get home from work, go downstairs to put stuff in the freezer, and notice the Xbox controller cable, strung out as far as it could be off to the side, disconnected from the controller, which still sits where I left it on the ottoman. How'd that happen? The cord was long enough to lay flat on the floor with slack left over, so it wouldn't have been suspended in the air like a tripwire. I thought maybe I just misremembered from the previous night, and somehow did leave it in the air as a tripping hazard. Either way, I doubt the cat could have done it, figuring the only possible way was if he got the zoomies and ran into it. I decided to test it, reconnected the cable with some tension so it's in the air like a tripwire. Walk into it. The controller just falls, but still attached to the cable. I reset it and try walking into it at a faster speed. Same thing happens. I reset it and go at running pace. The controller falls more aggressively, but nothing I do will recreate the event. The controller always stays connected to the cable. This is when I start suspecting the paranormal. As for why it did something so abstract as to unplug a cord and lay it across the other end of the room is anyone's guess. More time passes and things have been quiet, until one day I woke up and saw that the drawer of my nightstand had been pulled completely open. Never before has this happened to me, so I do my usual test to see if there's any way the cat could have accidentally done it, but nothing I try works. Now I'm convinced, but since these happenings are so mild, I was more curious than scared. Though I didn't like the idea of whatever was in the house, be it ghost or demon or whatever, was doing things closer and closer to me while I slept. The final event, now in November, happened while I was making lunch for the next day of work. I was filling up my water bottle with my cat sitting on the floor next to me, and about 4 feet behind us, the lid to the popcorn maker flips over and lands on the ground. Okay, there's absolutely no chance that was an accident, because the lid is a dome and that rests flat on top of the maker. Enough is enough, it won't let me ignore it any longer. This thing, whatever it is getting bolder. Well, guess what, Poltergeist, I thought. I'm bold too. Thinking of solutions, I remembered learning about the sign of the cross the month before, in RCIA, the rite of Christian initiation for adults. I made the sign of the cross and said, "You're not welcome here, dick for brains," and I haven't had any problems since. Thank you for those creepy little encounters. Let's jump straight into story number 5. This took place at my grandparents' house. Me and my younger sister used to share a room in their attic. Before we had this room, it was my sister's nursery, and the connecting room was our dad's and her mum's room. After we got the room, the connecting room was closed off and made into a storage room, which was filled with our great-grandparents' possessions after they passed. Another thing I should mention is that our stairs to go downstairs had the basement stairs directly under them. My sister, when she was around the age of 4, had an imaginary friend that she believed was living in our basement. Leading up to this event in particular, me and my sister would always hear knocking on the connecting room door and hear walking in that room. We never thought much of it and assumed it was just someone coming upstairs to check on us. One night I was going downstairs to grab dinner, and I came to a complete stop when I heard a woman's voice say my name. It sounded like it was coming from the basement. My heart dropped and I ran down the stairs as fast as I could. While in the kitchen getting my dinner, I heard the basement door swing open. It always made a loud squeaking noise whenever someone opened it, so it was hard to ignore. I called out hoping it was my grandfather, but got no response. Quickly ushering myself out of the kitchen, I went back to my room in the attic. Still to this day I will not go anywhere near the basement, and I also hate going into my old room. I have more stories about things that went on in my grandparents' house, which now I'm most certain was haunted. Case number 6. Back in the mid-80s I was living in a condo near a campus in Pennsylvania. The campus was beautiful and I would often walk my dog there. One day while we were walking along the creek in a wooded area, I saw a woman seated under one of the trees apparently reading a book. This wasn't uncommon, it's college grounds after all. She was young with dark hair in a knot at the back of her neck, and a dark sweater and skirt. There didn't seem to be anything remarkable about her. She did not speak, but looked up and smiled. The strangest thing about the encounter was the reaction of my dog. Molly the dog, who was very friendly normally, was pressed against my leg, every hair on her back upright, rigid-legged and growling. I looked down at her to calm her, and after a moment glanced back up to apologise to the woman. There was no one there. I have another incident that happened some years later. It happened in a shared house in West Philadelphia. The room I rented there had a history, it seemed. The previous tenant had moved out suddenly one night without notice. One summer night I was awoken because the room was blazing hot. I got up and realised the radiator was on and clanking away. It was so hot that the bottom of the poster hanging on the wall above it was scorched along the bottom. I couldn't figure out why the heat was on, and woke up my housemate Claudia, who was the de facto leader of the house. She got a flashlight and we went to the basement to check the furnace, and it had been shut completely down and the gas turned off. It was stone cold. We went back upstairs, opened all the windows on that floor and aired out the room. The radiator had stopped clanking and everything seemed normal again. However, I had trouble falling asleep. I read for a while and was disturbed by a rattling sound and looked up from my book to see a large glass bead rolling along the wooden floor. It rolled up to the bed and stopped. I spent the rest of the night in Claudia's room. A short little story from Carrie next, so let's get straight into it. My then boyfriend and now husband and I were living together. We had been dating for about 6 months and decided to move in together rather than him having to drive an hour to see me and then an hour home. This was in 2005. My grandmother had passed away and I loved her dearly. The day of her funeral I could not get there because there was a snowstorm the night before, and it just was not safe for us to make the hour drive. At the time the funeral would have been concluding, I was sitting playing solitaire on my computer. Keep in mind this was February in Iowa, so it was still very cold. As I'm sitting there, a breeze blows through the room that carries the smell of my grandma's powder. I have nothing that smells like this, and as I said, it's February, so the windows are closed. There should have been no way for a breeze to blow through at all, but I have always believed this to be my grandma, and her way of telling me goodbye, and that she understood why I could not be there. Even though this was 19 years ago, I remember it like it was yesterday. Shortly after this, my mother was hanging up a decoration on her wall. She had MS and was not always steady on her feet. She also had trouble gripping things because she could not tell how tight she was gripping something. She had just pounded the nail into the wall and accidentally lost her grip on the hammer, just as it would have hit her foot. She felt a hand on her shoulder that pulled her back and made sure her foot was out the way. She was always certain that it was my grandma watching out for her, and because of my experience, I believed her. Enjoying the stories tonight? Then please do let me know what you think in the comments below. Skeptics and believers alike are very welcome to leave their thoughts, but please bear in mind that the people who experience these stories will likely read your words. Let's get into some creepy childhood encounters next. My grandparents live in the same house that my grandfather grew up in, and its original structure is easily over 150 years old. I have been told that it used to be a speakeasy during the Prohibition era because during renovations they found bottles of alcohol in the walls and their basement used to be filled with all sorts of broken glass and debris. This will all become relevant in a bit. My family lives about 2.5 hours away from them, so we like to go on a week-long visit at least once every summer. One time when we were staying with them, I woke up from a nightmare in the middle of the night. I can't remember the nightmare now, but I was about 6, I think. So I sat up to go to my mum, but stopped when I saw something in the doorway. Do you know how when you look directly at a light and then look away you get a rainbow outline of the light stuck in your vision? In the doorway I saw that, but in the perfect outline of a skull, floating at about the height that an adult would be. I got so scared that I froze and just stared at it. After a few seconds of it just floating there, it vanished, and I went back to bed, too scared to get any closer to the door. Years later I remembered my experience and told my grandma about it. She told me about how old the house was, and its history, and also some of the experiences she's had. In years past she's heard footsteps from upstairs, even though no one else was home, and other things of the like. I'm not religious, but I'm also not much of a skeptic when it comes to ghosts. I think that energies from people have the potential to linger if the situation is right. I believe that it's possible that people who passed away, maybe from fights or alcohol poisoning, or something during that Prohibition era, might still be lingering in that house, but I'm just grateful that they don't seem to be malevolent. Now the short summer break is out of the way, I will be back with you every single month with brand new tales like this. If you don't want to miss out, then please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's so amazing to me that already 10,000 of you have decided to spend these long nights together. Let's get into our next encounter. I frequently walk around my neighbourhood late at night. Something that could be considered dangerous, I know, but my neighbourhood is very small and safe, and I always bring some form of protection with me. At the time, my dog was around a year or so old, and so was always very energetic. Since he would hear me getting ready to go out, he would get excited, and I would often take him with me. The street I walk most often is a long cul-de-sac. It takes about 20 minutes in total to walk all the way around it. Near the loop of the cul-de-sac is a house that, to my knowledge, has sat empty for at least 15 years. It's always creeped me and my friends out, since the yard would get very overgrown and there were large vines crawling up the sides. Sometimes it looked like a light was on inside, even though no one was supposed to live inside the house. It always gave off a generally creepy aura. I never felt comfortable walking on the sidewalk in front of that house, and so I would often step off the sidewalk, walk around the house by walking on the street, and then walk up the end of the driveway of the house to get back on the sidewalk. One night I was going for my walk as usual. I will note that my dog is fairly large, weighing about 75 pounds, and has always been very protective of me. It's unlike him to get frightened. Just like any other night, he and I stepped off the sidewalk before reaching the house, walked around it on the street, and began walking back up the end of the driveway, back to the sidewalk. As my dog and I took a step onto the end of the driveway, something became angry with us. I heard the sound coming near the garage, which was closed, and should have muffled the sound if it was coming from inside the garage, but it didn't. My dog heard it too, and in a manner entirely unlike him, he tucked his tail between his legs in fear. The best way I can describe the sound is at first like a cat. That sort of deep hiss cats do when they're angry. Then a cat's low yowl. In a way that's hard to describe, the low yowl morphed and turned into a deep, angry growl. Something that should only ever come from a canine. I was frozen for a moment, but then took off sprinting and my dog followed close behind. The entire way back I had the feeling that whatever had made that noise was following us. When I got back home I locked my door, and only then did I try and see if I could see anything coming down the road behind us. But there was nothing. I didn't feel safe. It felt like whatever it was now stalking around outside. I put my dog in his crate and then rushed outside to bring my pet turtles inside, where I felt they would be safer. Now is a good time to mention that I'm pagan. I went to my altar and consulted with my deities, asking them for protection and guidance on how to keep this evil out of my home. I lined all the windows and doors in my house with sea salt, then used an incense censer to help cleanse the perimeter of my property. While walking the property line and swinging the censer, I felt like I could hear footsteps in the grass around me, but I remained focused on the cleansing. The house felt lighter when I went back inside, and it seems as though I was able to ward off whatever made that sound, and whatever tried to follow me. Since then I avoid that house entirely when I go on walks. I don't even like looking at it. I live in the suburbs in the American Midwest. The largest animals we have around are raccoons, foxes, and rarely coyotes. Since that night I have searched endlessly, listening to countless hours of different animal vocalizations. The closest possible animal was a bobcat, but the hissing I heard was higher pitched and the growl I heard was completely different. Besides this, bobcats are not found this far west in my state. Even if I had seen a bobcat, I should have been able to see its outline. If it had chased me and my dog, we wouldn't have been able to outrun it. I don't know if I'll ever really know what it was I heard that night, but I honestly hope that I never encounter it again. Next up is Vanessa, with another short creepy experience. I've been very sensitive to things all my life. I actively avoid things, places and people so as not to trigger or alert anything to my awareness. The reason for this is my first encounter was traumatic to me at a very young age. I rarely share this story as it seems so far-fetched for a 7-year-old to experience. I had written it down when it happened and have not elaborated on it at all since. When I was 7, I went to spend the week with relatives who were very religious. Their life revolved around their church. They were very good, nice and generous, and I loved spending time with them. This is why my parents were okay with sending me to them for a week for my first sleepover. My cousin was much older than me, already graduated from high school. I would be spending the night with her in her room. To be clear, I was not a timid or shy child. I was not aware of death or anything beyond my world at this age. I had siblings, a stable home and family life, and was overall a happy kid. I spent a fun and uneventful day with my cousin and her mother. As the day drew to a close, we were watching a sitcom on TV in her room, and my cousin went out to make us popcorn. As she walked out of the room, I felt warm heat near my covered legs. As I looked down, I saw a scaly green hand with large yellowish claws reaching towards me from the edge of the bed. It rested upon the white sheets and I could smell rotten eggs. I learned years later that this was the smell of sulphur. I screamed and heard my cousin's footfalls as she ran back to the room. I looked up at the door and told her the hand and pointed to where I had seen it. It was gone, leaving a very clear impression of where it had been on the sheets and blankets. I could see where the fabric had been creased between the weight of the fingers. My cousin, not seeing anything wrong, threw her arms around me and erased all evidence that anything was there. I was inconsolable and my parents were called to pick me up. Sleepover would have to wait until I was older. A few things I learned after that incident. When my mother used to babysit my cousin in that house, she always felt like she was being watched. She hated to leave my cousin unattended while she napped, because she felt like something would happen to the baby. My cousin also had strange things happen to her, and she was always told that those who shine brightest in their faith attract those things that live in the darkness. I have found this to be true in my life when being in the presence of other very devout people. I think our time together is starting to come to an end, my friends. But don't worry, I'm sure we'll find one another out there in the darkness again very soon. Until then, how about one more story for tonight? Back when I was younger, late elementary school I think, since I'm pretty sure I was 9 or 10 years old at the time, I was part of a small city softball team. I wasn't really into it that much, but I had a good arm for it, and was much bigger than all the other girls my age, so the coaches always liked to encourage me to stay in as long as I could. I quit not too long after the season ended, when this incident had occurred, both after a poorly timed broken ankle sitting me out for the rest of the games, and finally managing to convince my mum to let me quit. Even before this experience I had always been into ghost stories and being spooked, since my mum is really into psychic things and is very superstitious, and both my 2 younger siblings are believers too. The 4 of us aren't religious, not attending church or praying, but still believe in something after death other than just not existing. My dad doesn't believe in any spirit except the Holy One though. The incident went as follows. One night I was heading home from my softball practice with my dad. It usually went on for a good hour even after the sun had gone down already. The complex where the softball fields were was all the way across town from where we lived. And even then we lived on a country road about 3 miles out after you reached the end of the city. We were on the outskirts of our town, right at the last stoplight, and consistent streetlights before reaching the darker part of our drive, when from far away I could see a dark figure crossing the road in front of us. The intersection was built like a T, with only 3 ways you could go, and part of it was a short bridge raised over a mid-sized ditch that I think was a creek at one point, but was only full of overgrown weeds most of the times I'd seen it. We were driving straight and would not need to turn, just getting to the end of the bridge and approaching the traffic signal, and the other road was to the right. The person I saw was walking across the crosswalk area from right to left, right under both the lights from the street lights and the traffic signal. It was a very well lit area really, which makes the experience all the stranger, I think. The light being green, my dad did not stop or slow down. He was actually on the phone with someone the whole time, and his usual can of beer held between his legs. You don't have to tell me both those things were bad. Believe me, I know. That's small town Texas for you. While he was busy chatting though, I was getting increasingly worried about this person I was seeing crossing the road in front of us. At the speed they were walking and the speed we were driving, it was clear we were gunning to hit them dead on. My dad wasn't even tapping the brakes or acknowledging someone was in danger of being hit. Finally, getting freaked out enough I knew a collision was about to happen. I started trying to shake my dad's arm and call out to him that he needed to hit the brakes, but I can't remember if I actually managed to say anything or he just didn't listen. Facing forward and scared for this person's life, I saw them inches away from the front end of our old red pickup truck, and it turned to look at me through the windshield. I got a good look at its face since it felt like everything both froze and happened all at once. It has been a while, but I remember the face as being shadowy, with no features and wide red eyes, staring right into my own. My dad drove right through it, and there wasn't even a bump, as we either phased through or it dissipated. So I knew right away it wasn't actually a flesh and blood person that I saw. As we drove away still on the way home, I sat there shocked. I refused to look out to the car windows anymore the rest of the ride, especially since it was nearly pitch black without the streetlights being overhead anymore. Silently freaking out the rest of the ride home, I don't even think I told my mum what happened right away, and didn't bother trying to ask my dad anything, since I knew he didn't react at all the whole time I was seeing this thing. I just ran inside the house as quick as I could to where it was well lit and nothing could scare me. What made it all the more confusing to me as I thought back to it so many times since then is how normal whatever it was had looked when I first saw it. It looked to be normal height. Our old Toyota's pickup hood came to maybe waist height on it, and it seemed to me to either be a teen or a young adult male by the way it walked, hunched over slightly at the shoulders, with hands in a hoodie pocket that had the hood up. Quick steps with weight to them that made it sway a little from side to side. I remember seeing it had a full body, but I can't actually remember what it was wearing on the bottom, shorts or pants. I could see vague clothing on it, even though everything was a shadowy grey-black, and it did not float or look wispy around the edges. I probably would have noticed its lack of colour, had it not been very late at night, and only the streetlights illuminating the street above it. Notably, I did not feel evil from it at all, even as we drove a truck through it. It was really just like I was seeing someone crossing the road like normal, until its head turned to look at me. Remembering the red eyes peering out from a featureless face under a hood, while my dad apparently didn't see a thing, always spooks me though. And that about brings our drive together to an end tonight. I hope you haven't got too much further to go. I feel bad about leaving you all alone with all these things out there in the dark. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. It all helps support the channel and will keep me bringing you these creepy real life encounters. So the last thing that remains is to extend an extra special thanks to all those supporters over on Patreon who help keep the lights on here at the Tape Library Archives. Our Tape Library archivists Xavier Rangel, Umiko Grimm, Tyler Michael, Tracy Torello, Sandy Lusk, Restock1731, Mira, Judith Hacker, Gabrielle, Eric Salas, Destiny M, Ashlar's Books, Alex O'Neill, Adeline, Peter McCann, Deppy Johnny, Dominic DeAngelis, Melissa Harrison and Dean J. Daly, the lead archivists Van Yale, Brian Baker, Old Soul Like Mine, Lord William and Alex Goldberg, and our grand overseers, Forevan, Morning Rain 2619, Katie, Agent 355, Brock Hampton, and Grim Reaper KL. Thank you all so much for your continued support, and to all my junior archivists for keeping the tape library and Night Drive Paranormal going. I hope to see you all very soon, if you survive the night, that is.